And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Okay, flying weather for Thursday morning. A lot of IFR here from the Koyukuk Valley, then really expansive there from the Brooks Range out to the Arctic coast. More IFR central western Bering Sea, marginal VFR into the Yukon Delta coast there, Kuskokwim Bay, on up and covering the Seward Peninsula, IFR along the Alaska Range, and also for the North Gulf Coast with a lot of IFR for the southeast coast. And then for the afternoon, marginal VFR here breaking out over the central and western portions of the Panhandle with IFR over toward the border. IFR also up along the North Gulf Coast for the afternoon. Still some IFR here around Windy Pass there and the park areas. And marginal for the central interior. IFR holds there for the Brooks Range out to the Arctic coast. Marginal VFR mostly over the western interior with VFR, Bristol Bay down across Kodiak Island. And marginal VFR for the eastern Bering Sea into the coast and down to the Alaska Peninsula with IFR from Atco westward, probably to the Komodorskis. And for Friday morning, that doesn't change much. IFR actually a little farther east here, as you can see from Thursday afternoon, pulling in toward Nikolsky and in toward the Pribilof Islands on out to the west with marginal VFR again, covering the eastern Bering Sea, portions of the Yukon Kuskokwim Delta. IFR here over the inland areas of the Seward Peninsula down to about Koyuk there in Norton Bay. And IFR, northern Koyukuk Valley, right on up across the Brooks Range on out to the Arctic Ocean. And for for the Tanana Valley, there's some IFR right on down to the Alaska Range into the Talkeetnas, linking up with a band of IFR along the North Gulf Coast that extends down across much of the Panhandle. VFR breaking out here over Kenai Peninsula, Cook Inlet into the southern Susitna Valley, extending down to Kodiak Island and on up into Bristol Bay in the southern Kuskokwim Valley. Then for a Friday afternoon, good VFR here on the east side of the state, south of the Porcupine River there, on down into the eastern Alaska Range. Portions of the Cop River Basin, other areas there of the basin will see marginal VFR. A little bit IFR there around Yakutat, otherwise mostly VFR for the southeast coast. Good VFR Kodiak Island here, right on up into south central Alaska, southern Kuskokwim Valley and Kuskokwim Delta. Bristol Bay looking really good. Marginal VFR Yukon Delta northward there across the Seward Peninsula, the northwest coast. Band of IFR here out over the west central Bering Sea from about Tumac Island westward to around Amchitka Island. And for the passes, Brooks Range, another IFR day coming up for both passes there, Anatuvik and Adigan. Lake Clark and Merrill, marginal VFR, looks rather marginal for rainy and windy IFR. And for Isabel, marginal VFR, possible IFR early on. Mintesta, VFR with possible marginal VFR in the southern entrance. Tanita looking marginal throughout the day. And Portage, IFR, Chilkoot and White, IFR. Freezing levels here, northerly winds pulling chilly air down south 2,000 feet here, all the way down into the Kuskokwim Delta there. So 32 degrees should occur tomorrow morning at about 2,000 feet over Bethel and about 4,000 feet over King Salmon, with 6,000 feet down to Kodiak Island south of the Alaska Peninsula. And 8 to 12,000 feet there for the southeast coast. Actually a little lower here, 6,000 feet over Yakutat, so conditions finally cooling off there over the southeast coast, at least aloft. And for the icing, pretty good area, considerable moderate rime or mixed icing here from the Arctic coast right through the central interior into the Kenai Peninsula, extending from eastern Bristol Bay in toward cross Prince William Sound to about Cape St. Elias. Another zone out here over the Panhandle, and then out to the west, some more icing moving into the far western Aleutians. And looking at the jet stream, that getting pushed eastward here by this jet, 135 knots, and mostly kind of takes off to the southeast there, just clipping the western and central Aleutians. And then we have a trough axis here with a couple of low centers, one near Kivalina, another one south of the Kenai Peninsula. and a good south to north jet here right across the central and southern panhandle into the Yukon up to 115 knots. And 9,000 feet here, southerly flow 35 to 40 knots from the southeast Copper River Basin right on down toward the Queen Charlotte Islands. Lighter under a general trough of low pressure over the interior, but northeasterlies 35 knots, western north slope, turning north at about 35 knots, right on down along the west coast there, in across Bristol Bay and the Aleutian Range. And then farther to the west here, we've got some westerlies along and just south of the Aleutians there, 45 knots or so. 3,000 foot wind flow showing a couple of low centers out here over the Bering Sea. Not too strong. Westerlies up to 35 knots over the Aleutians there. Stronger northwest winds here for the Alaska Peninsula up to 40 knots. 45 knots there blowing through Kamishak Gap there into the Barren Islands. And northeast 35 to 40 knots, western Arctic coast on down across Kivalina. And then easterlies here are southeast 35 to 40 knots along the North Gulf Coast. Turbulence, moderate chop here, moderate turbulence actually here for Kamishak Bay and the Barren Islands, Shelikof Strait and the Aleutian Range. Also looking a little bumpy there from Kivalina, Point Hope, Cape Lisburne, maybe up to Point Ley. Look for considerable moderate turbulence there. Otherwise, light to isolated moderate for Adak and Atka, westward to Shimia and Attu.